Welcome to All Villa, No Filler. Please subscribe to the show. There's a lot going on with Aston Villa right now, and who better to chat with about that than the Athletics, Jacob Tanswell. Great to have you on again, Jacob. Well, first off, what's the general feeling around Villa about how the January transfer window went?
Hi, mate. It's great to be back. On the transfer, I think they're broadly fine and happy with it. I think they knew the restrictions. They knew what the issues were in coming into the window in terms of the finances, having to create a gap in the squad. And I think they were happy with what they did. They got the striker that they wanted. They had to adjust and adapt quickly to the midfield crisis, which they did do. And it made practical and logical sense and financial sense, most importantly, to bring Douglas Luiz back. And I think, it might be overlooked, but that final day where they managed to send a few out on loan, some of the promising lads, Jamaldine Jamal Alaba, Ben Broggio, I think they'll be broadly pleased with how the windows went.
Yeah, for sure. And, given the fact that, Villa have been quite restricted in the last couple of transfer windows because of UEFA, is there any sense of frustration about how challenging these transfer windows actually are now?
I think so. I think they've felt that frustration for some time, really. Ever since I started covering Villa, this is my third season now. It's always felt like they've been hamstrung in the market and they've had to do deals. That first summer, they helped with PSR through academy sales. The following summer, it was through these niche, clever swaps. Lewis Dobbin, Tim Robinham. Then obviously the last window, and also Douglas Luiz. Then in the last window, they didn't get Champions League, so the Champions League deficit was there. So they had to then sell Jacob Ramsey. Obviously, the women's team was sold. So they've had to basically every single window that they've had to firefight and really judge risk free reward. And I think now there is frustration now, of course. And it's not lost on people that when Chelsea, Man City, and those teams were building, they didn't have any of these restrictions in their way.
Yeah, for sure. And given UEFA's restrictions, it's the sense has been that Villa have had to sort of sell to buy, really, particularly in the last year or two since the sanctions came in. Is the sense that sell to buy will be the way forward for the foreseeable future as well?
I'm not too sure. It obviously is dependent on Champions League and where they finish up and contracts and everything like that. That can all make an impact and a dent in the budget. But the hope is that if they get Champions League this season, which is the goal, they're going to have a far broader and bigger net of players to fish from. Really, it's just the fact that in the last window, and I'm sure we'll come on to it, Frankie. In the last season, missing out on Champions League meant a 70 million deficit, so they had to fill it somewhere, and that's not just factoring in the squad cost rules, obviously having to lower the wage bill, PSR, etc. So they've had to firefight on multiple fronts in finance. It's not just a case of right, we need to find 70 million. It's we need to find 70 million whilst reducing the salaries and everything like that. So it is required some creative thinking, but and also, I think if there's another manager, you probably tell that manager to sit on their hands for a little while whilst we figure it out. But Emery's the type of guy that wants something every single window, so you've got to do all that whilst making sure he's okay as well.
Yeah. Now, one player who's obviously reappeared recently is Harvey Elliott. The long lost Harvey Elliott has finally come back. What's the latest on his situation?
Yeah, so we reported on deadline day that he was going to stay for the rest of the season. Contrary to reports at the time, obviously it's just 72 hours ago, so things change every day, but there hadn't really been any progress, any discussions on removing that obligation or that cap. It's important to say that both teams can change the agreement, at their will, really, in terms of they both can pay a fee to either from Liverpool's perspective to bring him back or from Villa's perspective to terminate the agreement. So if either team were willing to, they could have done it by now. I don't think that there's been that agreement. I don't think there's been that any sort of progress on that. The hope is still he's still training, obviously still part of the team, be in the squad. The hope is still that they can find an arrangement before he reaches that 10-game limit. But January, which was an opportune time for it, nothing really changed, and that's quite disappointing for the player. But he's back among the players, back among the squad, and I think he'll be used as the current agreement is. I think he'll be used when he needs to be, really, because you don't want him to use those three appearances up too quickly.
Yeah, it definitely has to be one of the strangest situations I think I've ever seen at Aston Villa for a player, particularly who is so talented. But I mean, it's not really whether I rate him; it's whether Unai Emery rates him. And is there any sense that Emery just doesn't really rate him at all? Or I mean, what's
I
the
think
deal?
if he rated him, he would have said, let's play the 10 games and then let's pay the 30 to 35 million obligation. It wasn't his first choice. We've said it multiple times. I think last time I came on here, we said that Lucas Paquetá, other number 10s were his preference. Harvey Elliott has lived a curious existence since he came here. I remember Emery singling them out of criticism after that Sunderland draw, which, if you remember that game, Elliott was probably the least likely to get singled out. So really, he's not particularly his Emery's type of player. You see the difference between let's say a Rodgers and Elliott. Look at a difference in physique, their natural attributes. They're very different. Obviously, the athleticism as well. Elliott's better in that team that it's a bit like Liverpool, really, that thrive on pressing and a bit chaotic. Rodgers is obviously a physical monster, so they're very different. And I do think he likes him, but he doesn't love him, if that makes sense.
Okay, sure. And Allison, he was the first signing of the window. How's he generally got on since joining?
I think a lot of the teammates, I wrote a piece about him. A lot of teammates have been impressed by him in terms of his physicality and his pace, and that kind of echoes to recruitment team because they've seen a guy that is okay. He had one goal in 34 appearances, but equally he's got the physique. 6 foot tall. He's powerful. He's got the natural profile of right winger that Villa would like. It was just a case of whether he's adjusting and adapting. Of course, he had that injury early on, which has delayed his involvement. But we were speaking on Thursday. He should be hopefully okay for the Bournemouth game. Fit if Emery chooses not to have him in the squad, fine. But he should be in the place now where he's nearing full fitness. So I'm excited to see him. I think he'll definitely play at some point this season. But I think there's an understanding, Frankie, that in the summer is when you will probably see the best of him, having a pre-season under his belt and properly accustomed to living in England.
Yeah, because it's been reported he's had an injury, as you say. And is there any sense like when he'll be back, and any sense that he might actually appear this season for the first team?
Allison,
Yeah,
yeah, he should be. He should be. He's fully fit in the coming days, so there's a potential, like I say, for him to be in the squad for the Bournemouth game.
Okay, and something I also picked up on that you reported on in your most recent article, a fantastic article for The Athletic, is a line where you said supporters have wanted Yuri Tielemans to sign a new deal, having been under the impression he's only contracted until 2027. But you're saying that his contract runs beyond 2027.
Yeah, with most players, really, they sign a 3, 4, 5 year agreement, whatever it is, and then the club will have an option, and that's what Villa have on that. So, when Tielemans signed 2023, it was broadcast and documented as a 4 year deal, which it was, but Villa have an option, which obviously they're not going to turn down. So they have a little bit more control than you think. But yeah, I'm sure he's still a player, regardless. That they love to sort his contract out soon.
And the same goes for Ross Barkley, because there was a lot of talk about him potentially leaving this summer, but that's actually his contract actually runs beyond this summer as well. Is that correct?
Yes. I speak to people very close to him, and yeah, they say that's 2027. I do feel that even the contract does really play a big part in Barkley's future. I do think if there's an offer suitable, then yeah, he might leave. I know there was talks of like a Sheffield United or Wolves coming in at that. I don't think that was correct, from my understanding. But at the same time, he's not, when he's fit, he's not a first choice starter. And although he loves it at Aston Villa, there might be another team who can give him that game time and make sure, when he's fit, he's fantastic, isn't he? You saw that at Luton, and how good he was. So yeah, I think his future will certainly be discussed in the summer.
Right, and another young player that Aston Villa signed was Brian Maggio, £10 million for a then 16-year-old who's just turned 17 as well. I mean, was it a surprise that Villa went as high as that for somebody who was that young?
I think so. I haven't really seen too much of him, so I can't really tell. But speaking to people that have watched him for England youth teams at his previous club, I think there was a surprise that Villa got to that figure. But like I say in the article, he was scouted by first team, and specifically Emery's recruitment drive, and that shows that how much they of belief they have in him. And obviously, when you have Emery on side, you probably do tend to spend that extra few million on him. And the thing about Villa, we've seen it with Morgan Rogers, right? He wasn't brilliant in any of his EFL loans, but he identified, and Emery identified like a profile that he could mould into his system. So maybe that's the case with Brian Maggio, but we'll have to see. I'm looking forward to seeing, and I'm intrigued to see where he starts. I imagine he'll play obviously quite a few reserve 21s, 18s games, and who knows, we might see him in a matchday squad at some point this season.
It's exciting that he's had 5 performances already for Metz as a 16-year-old in Liga.
Mm.
He's featured for the Luxembourg national team, although he's now switched to England G team. So yeah, very fascinating player to watch in the coming years. And I suppose as well, £10 million. Maybe the talk is just that they theorise in future his floor will be 10 million. So
yeah, because remember when obviously when Villa signed Morgan Rogers, a lot of Middlesbrough fans were like, "Oh, we got a good deal for him," and now you say he's worth at least 10 times that. So
yeah,
yeah, we can see. Like I always think a player's value can change in an instant. Like you go, let's just say George Hemmings, right? He could go from maybe no one particularly wanting him on loan in the Championship, but as soon as he gets in an Emery squad on a bench or comes on, top Championship clubs will think, oh, actually, he must be quite good. We'll get him on loan, or even like Andres Garcia. Garcia's value is low at the moment, right? Probably because he's not played much. If he plays final 4 games of the season, Villa could probably double what they spent on him. So it's just very difficult to know like a player's value.
Yeah, for sure. And well, one player whose value we do know is obviously Evan Guessond. He came into Aston Villa, I think it was for around £28 million in the previous summer with supposed add-ons. But he's left for Crystal Palace on loan already. I personally found it a bit of a surprise.
Mm.
What did you think about it, and why did he leave?
Yeah, I found it a bit of a surprise as well. Because he came back from AFCON, and I think there were some discussions, with his reps and Villa, and I think the takeaway from that meeting was that he'd stay, for the rest of the season. I know there was talk of Mateta and Gesson, but I think there was a feeling that he would stay. But at the same time, I think he realised after that, subsequently, with Leon Bailey coming back, Tammy Abraham coming back, not getting on at Newcastle, and Leon Bailey did that, he's now behind in the pecking order. And if you have a choice as a player, do you stay in Birmingham where you're gonna have game time, but it's limited? You're not one of the bigger players. Just you're playing in a position that might not be comfortable for you. Wide right, or do you go to London with the team that has a history of scouting you? The recruitment guys, because obviously you have talked to them before. They really want you. They like you as a 9. They like you just behind the striker where he played at Nice, and that might suit him a little bit more. So, and Villa obviously were open for him to leaving as well. So I think from Guesser's point of view, just probably thought for my development and probably just the general environment, it might be better if I'm at Palace. But it did surprise me how quickly it developed.
It's funny when I watched Guesson's highlights from Nice. So much of what he did very well always seemed to be in a more central position, sometimes even towards the left and up front. Yeah. And we never saw that at Villa. And I just theorised that it was the Everton game where Guesson came on for John McGinn and went on the right, and he was just very, very pretty much anonymous. Where I wondered whether Unai Emery just gave up on him as a right winger and thought he's just not, and that's why he called Leon Bailey back.
I think there's a series of reasons, really. One of them is John McGinn's injury, like you say. Villa felt they needed a right-sided player, specifically a right-sided player that can come in on his left foot. Okay, Alisson can do that, but he's injured, very young. Who else can we get? We haven't got much money, so what do we do? Hold on, we've got a player on loan who their club want to send back, and if we even a 70% fit Leon Bailey, or at his best Leon Bailey, it's probably better understanding of that right sided position than Evan Guesson, and Guesson's not left-footed, very different players, so. Yeah, I think it made sense, really. And for me, I'm disappointed, like you say, because I saw Guesson quite a bit in Nice from the turn of year. He was playing as like a second striker. They played a 3-4-2-1 system, so he's playing like an inside forward, and that's where you really saw his goals. Where at Villa, he was off the right, starting wider. He's not really a winger. He can't really take players on like that. So yeah, very, very interesting to see how he gets on the Crystal Palace, because if we see something different from him, then that'll be great. And maybe he does come back at some point, but it looks like Emery's realised that he's going to need a lot of work.
Yeah, I wondered if he was slightly more would have been more comfortable in a more of a Jacob Ramsey role, just looking at his knees highlights than the right wing role. But I guess we'll see at Palace. We'll see how he gets on. One other player left was Daniel Marlin. So why did Villa let Marlin go and bring in Tammy Abraham?
Essentially, Emery didn't feel he could play as a number 9 on his own. He felt he had to play with Ollie Watkins, but that would mean changing the system. You saw that against Burnley to really good effect. He scored 2 as a second striker, didn't he? But you can't play that 4-4-2, 4-2-2-2, whatever, in every game because it leaves you a bit. It's a bit attacking, can leave you a bit open, impacts build-up play, etc. So, although they wanted Marlon to stay, it comes back to the finances, right? Ideally, you'd have Marlon and Tammy Abraham in the same squad, but they had to create a gap in that squad there to make some room in that squad. So they felt, okay, Marlon was wanting more game time as a number 9. They couldn't offer that to him. Villa and Emery had reservations of whether he could play as a number 9. So, and with Roma interested, they felt, okay, that's fine. We take the money, and then we can really use that money to strengthen in and get a type of player, the profile of player specifically that Emery wants. And you see the difference. You can see the obvious difference between Tammy Abraham and Marlon now. So, in terms of Abraham's a traditional number 9, can hold the ball up far better, and so that's the difference really. It's just about what really suits Emery's system.
Yeah, it felt with Abraham his ability, his aerial ability, and his back to goal, and his height, and just the fact he's an out-and-out number 9. He was a totally different profile to Marlon, but also to Watkins in a way. And I feel like there's more. It's just if you think of Watkins as a 60-minute player and Abraham as a 30 or vice versa, that to me actually makes a bit more sense than Marlon and Watkins. I feel like I agree with Emery in that Marlon, I think, was better as a sort of player off a striker rather than as the out number 9. But with Abraham, was that a very difficult deal to do? It did seem to drag on a fair bit.
Yeah, it was very difficult because you obviously had the issue of Besiktas triggering the obligation through appearances from Roma, so they then had to ensure that obviously Besiktas paid the 13 million euros to buy him, but then you had to convince Besiktas to say, right, I know you've just paid for this player, but we now want you to sell him. And they're thinking, my word, like we've just got this striker, why we need to replace him? Why on earth are we doing that? So they had to obviously wait for Besiktas to strengthen themselves, maybe offering players around, and it took a while. That's the reason why Vidigani and Alabi went up to Turkey on the Monday, 2 days before the rest of the team joined them, was because they had to have face-to-face conversations, work out an agreement, how they could do it. And it was only late in the day, literally towards the final minutes of the Fenerbahce Villa game, that Yasin Ostan came into the equation on loan, and we're plus 21 million euros. So it was very, very difficult. And there was many times in that long running pursuit where Villa and the player himself felt it wouldn't happen.
And how eager was Tammy to come back himself?
In short, very, very eager. He obviously sacrificed a significant amount of money to make it. He made it clear that it was either he stays at Besiktas or he goes to Villa. There were 2 other Premier League clubs, and as I put in my end of window read, among them was Everton. But he made it very clear that he wanted to go to Villa if he was going to go back to the Premier League. Has a connection with them, watches all their games. Very, very happy to work with Emery. Emery wanted him, in 2023 pre ACL injury. So there's a lot of work that had gone into it from both sides to make it happen.
And what's the general vibe at Bodymoor Heath to seeing Douglas Luiz coming back?
They're very happy. Yeah, he was very popular with the squad, with the players. Emery loves him. Don't get me wrong, Emery's a taskmaster. Douglas Luiz gives him tough love.
Yeah,
but he knows what he can do. And I think most crucially in that midfield position, you need someone in January to adapt straight away. And Douglas Luiz is ingrained to how Emery wants his midfielders to operate. So I think that was the key really for Villa to get someone that can come in straight away. Among all the injuries, Kamara, Tielemans, these guys, McGinn, and have a leader in that midfield, a presence in midfield who knows the role very well. So I think they'll give them all a lift, especially after the triple injury blow in as many weeks.
Yeah, it was a brutal few injuries, wasn't it? My God. Now, There was a report in The Athletic as well about Morgan Rogers being a target for a lot of clubs. I think we all naturally know that a player of his ability is always going to capture the eyes of, various clubs who have lots of money. Is there a feeling at Villa they could be planning for or even relying on a Rogers sale in the summer to get going in the transfer window?
Yeah, I've said this for a little while, and I've reported for a while, in terms of he still remains a massive interest for so many clubs in the Premier League, in Europe, regardless of whether he signed his third contract in 3 seasons, because of just how good he is, but how multifunctional he can play. So many positions, he can adapt to so many systems. He's always available, fit, strong. His potential is limitless. You see, he's at a level now where he's one of the best number 10s in Europe, but yet he's still got clear areas of his game to work on. So, there's undeniable information that people and clubs do love him and do want him, but it will obviously depend in my view, it will depend on Villa getting Champions League, which means more revenue, more income. They can resist these bids. But you look at that squad, and there will have to be turnover at some point. How do they do it? Yeah, they can do it through getting Champions League, but they probably have to do it. And I think Monchi said it when he was there. Villagani said it publicly that they're not afraid to sell players in order to rejuvenate the squad and allow the squad to rejuvenate. And there will be a time in the next couple of years, squads, some of them are aging together, where you need the extra finances to transition the squad. And Rodgers is undoubtedly the biggest asset. But yeah, I think a lot will depend on Champions League football and whether Villa are in it. But again, with Rodgers signing his new contract, it was never a case of he's signed another contract, he's going to be here till 2031. It was more a case of Villa are giving him a salary that is in line with the best playmakers in Europe.
Yeah, and I think a fair amount of it may also come down to the World Cup. And if he's a starring player in the summer, then it's a bit like when Grealish was at the Euros. Suddenly you've got the Real Madrids of the world might be interested. And speaking of Real Madrid, there were reports from Spain. I don't know how legitimate they really were, but that Real Madrid were interested in Unai Emery. I've also seen they've been linked to Jose Mourinho, and my main thing is I think they're going to go for Jurgen Klopp. But with Emery and Real Madrid, is there any discussion about that? Is there any sense that might be something that could happen? Or
I don't know on those reports really. I think it makes sense. If I was from Real Madrid's perspective, it would make sense for them to go for Unai Emery. One of the best managers, maybe the best in terms of performing pound for pound. And the fact that he's Spanish, I think he'll be lined up for every single big job. But we'll have to wait and see. There's obviously nothing imminent on that. But Real Madrid always love to put leaks out and who they like, but a lot of it is also equally a smokescreen as well. So we'll have to see. Emery obviously will only be human to be attracted to that. I don't know if he is, but it's a massive club, and we'll have to see. But a lot needs to happen for that to take place and to go through.
And the sense you get from Emery is that he's really enjoying his time at Villa. I guess he's in a rare state as a manager, really, particularly these days, where he's had 2 sporting directors now who have been brought in for him specifically. He's got
by him,
yeah. Essentially, a club built in his image, really, which is comparable to something like Arsene Wenger at Arsenal back in the day. It's very, very rare that happens now. I guess the only drawback would be that he's having to constantly work with these financial restrictions that seem to be in place at Villa. Is there ever any sense that he ever gets frustrated with that? Or
yeah, he'll of course he'll be frustrated, and he wants to improve every time. But I think he will know deep down one of the reasons why they do have restrictions is because of him, the type of players he wants, the recruitment, the money they spend on high salaries, the way they generally operate. They don't keep the powder dry. That's what I'm trying to say. They do push it to the limit because at the request of him. And if you want to help with the finances, don't use this particular recruitment strategy, which is obviously very manager led. Don't employ the biggest backroom staff that the Premier League has. Don't have the huge shadow he's on. So he knows that you have to give and take. You have to see ground, and one of the drawbacks is because he's got all this power, there will become some blind spots, and one of them is obviously the financial restrictions. But no, he's happy. He knows that he's got everything he would want at Villa. He'll know that obviously Real Madrid is different, but he's a man that has got fierce ambition, right? He said it publicly. His dream is to win the Champions League, and I think the day that he feels that Villa can't, I've stopped to dream or stopped daring to dream, as he always says in the program notes. Then maybe that's a time where he might turn his attention elsewhere.
Yeah, as I say earlier, I sort of just repeat that I think he's got a club that essentially is in his image, and that's very difficult to leave that, because I mean, where'd you go from that really? That
Yeah.
But something else as well is we've got Villa had Bournemouth this weekend, and I know Bournemouth is a club whose shirt you may have worn at one time as well when you're in their youth teams. But I mean, what do you think about that game? What do you think about Bournemouth right now? I don't know how much you've been watching them this season, but what do you think about that game coming up?
Yeah, I was actually writing a piece before I came on here. I spoke to another sporting director probably 2 weeks ago, and they were saying how basically Villa are at the forefront almost of modern football trends in terms of being high possession when they want to be, but really great on transition as well. They can basically play two styles, which are fantastic on what you need in modern football. And if you remember the game last year at Bournemouth, because Bournemouth, the way they attack, and it's still the case now, the way they generate chances is through high pressing, and basically their number 10 is high pressing. They're not very good at breaking down low blocks. So what Villa did last year so intelligently was they just basically sat in, had 37% possession, and hit Bournemouth on the counter attack, let Bournemouth have all the ball, because whenever they have more than 50% possession, Bournemouth, they rarely win. So I wouldn't be surprised if Villa do that again, in terms of just making sure that they sit in a shape. They're fairly passive. They don't keep the ball too much, but they really try and say, "Come on, then, ball, try and break through us. We're happy in this block, but we're going to have players like hopefully Watkins, Rodgers. The guys that have got a real counter-attacking threat. Leon Bailey, that we can hit you on the break and score for that way."
Yeah, it's Villa have that versatility of style, as you say, and they also have a pretty good record against Andoni Raiola under Unai Emery. I don't think we've lost to Bournemouth. I think we've probably beaten them 4 times,
Yeah.
maybe, while he's been there. We won there last season as well, 1-0. But obviously, Onana was one player who didn't appear at the weekend against Brentford. Any update on that? Was there a reason for that, injury-wise? Or
muscle tiredness.
Okay.
That's what the official line was. And you'd have to think that if he was in the squad last week, you'd hope that he's improved in 7 days since with adequate rest. He's definitely not trained every single day since. But the Villa team had a few days off after the game against Brentford. You'd hope in that time he's recovered and he'd be available. But this is the games that you need Onana. I remember, like I said, the game last season, Onana was arguably man of match in that game. He was phenomenal, and he's put in some phenomenal performances this season. But you just need to see him in the park, don't they?
Yeah.
The best players always underpinned by availability, and you can't get to the levels you want to reach if you're not available a lot of the time. So, for his sake, I hope he's fit for Saturday.
Cool, and he's looked a lot closer to that £50 million player when he's played this season, hasn't he? He's been tremendous. Yeah. But sort of as a last question, Villa at the weekend, obviously the loss to Brentford, but did those behind Liverpool, Chelsea, and United all got wins? How are you feeling about Villa for the rest of the season? And if you had to predict, dare you predict, where do you think they'll finish?
I think they'll finish in the Champions League spot. It's important they don't let this slump at home continue. If they can get back to the levels they were at, they should be fine. But there was always going to be a time where the gap was going to narrow. The other team's going to get their act together. But you look at these other teams still. Man United, okay, they've had a bit of a manager bounce. Liverpool, who knows what to get from Liverpool. And the same is true of Chelsea. I can't see any of them really putting a run together when they win 4, 5, 6 in a row. I think they're always going to drop points. That's the way this season is. So Villa got to this point in the first half of the season through being the adults in the room, almost from being Mr. Consistent by churning out wins, grinding out points. I think they've got the best staying power and the best resilience among those teams. So I think that they should be fine. It would take more injury, bad luck, and a real just downturn in physical form and fitness, I guess, to derail this. But I think they should be fine. It's just they need to make sure that this little run they're on, where they lose to Everton, lose to Brentford at home, doesn't continue.
Yeah, it's strangely similar to 2 years ago when Villa went on a great calendar year run. I think we won 15 in a row at home, and then in the January lost to Chelsea at home and lost to Newcastle at home, and then bounced back and we're okay. It's really similar trend actually. It's just been great calendar year, won a load of row at home, and then January somehow lose to at home. It's just quite odd. But Jacob, thank you so much for coming on. I won't know, but there was a question here. I just wanted to quickly touch on from Steve, good friend of the channel. How much training is Jacob getting in for his charity run? Let us know a little bit more about what Steve is talking about there.
Yeah, so I'm currently training for a marathon in April in Brighton. It's for the Alzheimer's Society, and training's going well. I'm lucky that I have a job that I don't have to work in an office all the time. I can very rarely, my day looks very different. Like yesterday when I went on my long run, I woke up at 5:30 in the morning. Some days where I think I want to be busy in the later in the day, so if there's a game in the evening, I'll try and fit a morning run in, or vice versa. If there's an interview I've got in the morning, I'll try and fit a Thursday, an evening run or gym session. I'm tend to be going to the gym twice a day, running as well, 3 times, 4 times a week, long runs. And it's been busy, especially with the January transfer window. But now that's quite down. Then hopefully I can get really focused on my running. But yeah, it's going well, and over £2,000, 2,300 I think we're on, which is unbelievable. I couldn't expect it. My target was £500, so it's blown my mind. So thank you for everyone that's contributed to it so far.
That's amazing, and I will put a link in as well on YouTube
mate.
and audio, so for where people can find it, because that's very, very good cause, and good luck to you with that. And for those who don't know, where can we find you and your work online?
I'm on Blue Sky, Twitter, Threads, Instagram. Just search up my name. It should come. I don't think there's many other people that are called Jacob Tanswell. So yeah, just find me there. And of course, I'm on The Athletic as well, where you can read everything.
There's a few Frankie Maguires around, including one who played for Sheffield United for a while, and I was sort of hoping he might end up becoming the next Lionel Messi, so that people, when they said Frankie Maguire, would think of a brilliant football player. But sadly, it doesn't look like that's to be. He's gone on loan to the lower leagues now. But Jacob, thank you so much for coming on. Absolutely awesome to chat to you, and thank you so much for all your insights about Aston Villa and the brilliant work you do at The Athletic. We in the Villa fan base just really admire what you do. It's so informative and genuinely really, really excellent stuff. So thank you so much, Jacob, for coming on.
Appreciate it, mate. Thanks, mate.
Brilliant. Well, until next time, optimise your Villa.